I'm Manish, founder of Unbounded Systems, and today I want to talk about whether you should be patching Spectre and Meltdown. Now I promise this channel is not going to be all about Spectre and Meltdown, or even all about security. I do want to cover other topics, but because of the earlier YouTube videos we did on Meltdown and Spectre, I had a really interesting conversation this weekend with a security-oriented friend who thought the bugs weren't really that big of a deal. And he thought that because he was thinking about exposure for server systems. So the question is, should you actually patch these vulnerabilities? Well, the first question is, if you apply the patches for Meltdown and Spectre, do you suffer any kind of performance penalty? If you don't, then it's a no-brainer. Just go ahead and apply the patches and move on with life. So first, let's talk about Spectre, because I don't think there are any good fixes, like I said earlier. The major problem with Spectre is if you're running untrusted code on your system. So in particular, JavaScript on the web browser. Now, the one thing about Spectre to understand is that it can only get to data that's within the address space of the untrusted code that's running, at least without combining with other attacks like Meltdown. And so that means that if you can limit the address space of the untrusted code, then you can end up in a pretty good place. And this is exactly what browser vendors are moving towards to address that particular vulnerability from the JavaScript attack vector on clients. So that's enough about clients, and that's enough about Spectre. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to focus on the Meltdown vulnerability in the context of servers. So the first question is, are you actually running any untrusted code on your system? Again, most servers don't run untrusted code on their system. So when might you be running untrusted code? Well, the one case that I can think of that may be somewhat common is if you are providing a SaaS service where you download other people's code. So if you are running a CI server where you check something out from Git and run somebody's code, well, now you're running untrusted code. So in that case, you probably should patch the Meltdown vulnerability. The other place where I think that you have to worry about it is if you have some kind of web crawler that's executing JavaScript code in order to extract data from web pages. In that case, again, the problem is that you're running untrusted code, and you probably want to patch the vulnerability there so that people can't get to other secret data on the system, like all the authentication data for the database that you're writing that scraped data to. The other place where you really want to look at whether or not you should patch Meltdown is if you are relying on some form of kernel isolation to contain breaches. So in other words, let's suppose that you run things in containers in the hopes that if somebody gets to run some code in a container, they can't go and get to data in another container. Well, if you haven't patched Meltdown, that means that they can get to that other data. Not that you should really be relying on containers for that kind of security anyway, unless you've layered it in with something like LXD or some other mechanism. The other place is VMs. So if you're running virtual machines with unrelated virtual machines or unknown virtual machines on the same piece of hardware, then you need to patch the Meltdown vulnerability if you're relying on those VMs for breach containment. And that's because as soon as somebody can run code in one of the VMs, they can use Meltdown to get through to the hypervisor layer data, and that means they can see data for other systems, other virtual machines that are potentially running on that same system. The other place where you should be concerned about these vulnerabilities, although the patch is not your responsibility, is with your platform as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, or CI as a service, or as a service vendors where you're pushing code to those services. Not because your code is untrustworthy, but because that means that other clients of theirs can push code to the same place. Are you running on dedicated hardware or not? I know for a fact that some of these free tiers of services and services with very small instance types that are very inexpensive can't really have you on a dedicated piece of hardware. And that means, or even inside of a VM, which means that you need to make sure that that vendor has patched that vulnerability. And if you think that CI is not a big deal, think about it. If you're pushing to production from that CI environment, all your production credentials are in that CI environment when your CI pipeline is running. So you definitely want to make sure that your vendors patch those things. And that's it. Those are my basic thoughts on exposure to the Meltdown and Spectre vulnerability and whether or not you should patch it. If I've missed anything, please leave a comment. Oh yeah, and we need to do that post-roll thing, right? Yeah, okay. Oh, and if you like this video, click like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel.